They didn't leave with a threat. No declaration of war. No angry speech broadcast across 1,000 star systems. No final ultimatum delivered to the Galactic Council's gleaming chamber floor. Humanity simply left. And that silence? That quiet, dignified, devastating silence? It would shake the galaxy to its core in ways that no war ever could. But to understand why the silence was so loud, you have to understand just how long humanity had been invisible. 200 years. 2 centuries of service, sacrifice, and contribution. 200 years of humans showing up, working harder than anyone asked, healing diseases that had plagued alien civilizations for millennia, brokering peace between species that had been killing each other since before Earth had written language. 200 years of being patted on the head and told, not yet. Ambassador Kale Vasquez walked the empty corridor of the human embassy on Nexus Primus for the last time. Every office dark, every shelf bare. No ceremony, no farewell, just the soft echo of footsteps and the weight of a decision 2 centuries in the making. He didn't look back, and somewhere deep in the council's ancient halls, not a single delegate even noticed the lights going out. That was the wound that never healed. Not the rank, not the politics, not the 1,000 small humiliations dressed up as protocol. It was the invisibility. The way 400 species could share a station with humanity for 200 years and still look through them like glass. But here's the thing about glass. You only realize how much you needed it when it's gone and the cold comes rushing in. The shuttle carrying the last humans pulled away from Nexus Primus without a sound. No broadcast, no signal, just a growing distance between one species and every other. Lieutenant Priya Nair stood at the viewport, eyes red but steady, watching the station shrink into the dark. She whispered something under breath. Kale heard it. Let them figure it out. And somewhere across 1,000 sectors, the dominoes were already beginning to fall, though no one in the galaxy knew it yet. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days later. Not from a distress signal, not from a political communique. It came from a hospital, specifically from a medical ward on Theros Station, where a Velhari child, 6 limbs, bioluminescent skin, and a failing cardiovascular system, was dying from a condition that had no name in Velhari medicine. It had a name in human medicine: cascading myofibral collapse. Rare, aggressive, and, until 40 years ago, completely fatal across every species it touched. Humans had cracked it. A small research team out of Mumbai, working in collaboration with a Drenali biochemist, had developed a treatment protocol that worked across 11 different biological profiles. The Velhari doctors knew the treatment existed. They did not know how to administer it. They sent a standard query to the Human Medical Outreach Office on Nexus Primus. The message bounced back immediately. This terminal is no longer active. The lead Velhari physician, a decorated elder named Soreth, stared at the response for a long moment. Then she sent it again, assuming a system error. This terminal is no longer active. She tried the secondary contact, the tertiary, the emergency liaison channel that had never once gone unanswered in 30 years of her career. All of them, silent. Soreth stood very still in the middle of her ward, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the shallow breathing of a child, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: helplessness. She filed an urgent report to the Council. The Council logged it, assigned it a case number, and routed it to the Bureau of Interspecies Medical Affairs, a department that, as it turned out, had been almost entirely staffed by humans. The Bureau's offices were empty. Meanwhile, 3 sectors away, a trade negotiation between the Keth Dominion and the Orvani Collective was entering its critical final phase. The talks had been deadlocked for years. Everyone knew it. Everyone also knew that the only reason the 2 sides were still at the same table, still talking instead of shooting, was because of a single human diplomat named Rosa Mbeki, who had spent 7 years building trust with both delegations. Rosa had boarded a transport home 4 days ago. The Keth walked out of the talks on the morning of day 5. The Orvani Collective began mobilizing their border fleet by noon. In the council chamber, The senior delegates received both reports within minutes of each other. A dying child, a collapsing peace treaty, 2 crises, 2 departments, 0 humans. The council's first speaker, an ancient and unflappable Drenali named Velorin, set down both reports on the great curved desk and looked out at the chamber floor. And for the first time in his 300-year tenure, he had no idea what to do next. He pulled up the departure manifest for the human embassy. Final departure, 4 days ago. No forwarding contact. No transition document. No emergency protocol handed off to another species. Just gone. Velorin leaned back in his chair slowly. How many departments, he asked his aide quietly, were primarily operated by humans? His aide checked, then checked again, then looked up with an expression that, on a Drenali face, was the equivalent of pure, undisguised alarm. We're still counting first speaker. The counting took 6 hours. 6 hours for the most advanced administrative body in the known galaxy, a council governing over 400 species across 1,000 sectors, to tally up exactly how deeply one Class 7 provisional species had embedded itself into the fabric of everything. The final number was presented to Velorin just before midnight, station time. He read it once, then read it again, then set the data pad down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake. Humans had been operating, co-managing, or critically supporting 2,247 active council functions. Not dozens, not hundreds, 2,247. Medical translation services across 43 species. Conflict mediation in 16 active border disputes. Agricultural adaptation programs feeding populations on 31 colony worlds. Xenopsychology consultations. Infrastructure engineering, educational exchange networks, emergency relief logistics, the entire Council Archive digitization project, 1,000 years of galactic history being carefully preserved, was 60% complete and had been staffed almost exclusively by a human team out of New Nairobi. It was now 60% complete and frozen. Velorin summoned an emergency session of the Council, not a scheduled meeting. Not a formal assembly, an emergency session, the kind reserved for wars and extinction-level events. The delegates arrived confused. Some were irritated at being pulled from sleep cycles. The Keithian ambassador arrived still adjusting his ceremonial collar, visibly annoyed. Then Velorin read them the number. The chamber went very quiet. This cannot be accurate, said Ambassador Dross of the Mervani Collective, his 4 eyes narrowing. Humans are a Class 7 species. Provisional. They handle supplementary functions at best. Support roles. That is what we told ourselves, Velorin said. The distinction between what the Council believed and what was actually true had never felt so catastrophic. Because here was the brutal irony, and it was the kind of irony that cuts deep, the kind that keeps you awake staring at the ceiling. The Council had never given humans these roles. They had never formally appointed them, never elevated their status, never acknowledged what was happening in any official capacity. Humans had simply shown up. A crisis would emerge. Humans would step in. They'd solve it quietly, efficiently, without asking for credit or title or rank elevation. Then they'd stay because the problem was connected to another problem, and that one to another, and before anyone thought to ask how it happened, humans were load-bearing walls inside a structure no one had designed them to hold up, and the Council, fat and comfortable on the results, had never once looked down to see who was doing the actual work. "We need to contact them immediately," said the Velhari ambassador, her voice tight with urgency. "Open a channel to where?" Velorin interrupted quietly. "Silence. They have no embassy. They closed every outpost. There is no official channel remaining." He paused. "We do have one option. We can send a message to Earth itself, to their home government. Then do it," snapped Dross. "Tell them there has been a misunderstanding. Tell them we require their immediate return." Velorin looked at him for a long moment. "Ambassador," he said slowly, "I want you to consider very carefully the message we would be sending. After 200 years of calling them provisional, of denying every request for rank elevation, of overlooking every contribution, we would be contacting them, say, "Come back, we need you." The chamber was silent. What do you think their answer will be? No one spoke. Outside, somewhere in the depths of the station's lower levels, a water recycling system gave a loud mechanical groan, and then went still. The system had been maintained, as it turned out, by a human engineer named Dev Castellano. Dev was currently somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 37,000 feet above Earth, watching clouds. Earth received the Council's message on a Tuesday morning. It arrived through diplomatic channels that hadn't been used in years. Formal, ancient protocols dusted off in obvious haste. The message itself was carefully worded, measured, professional, but desperation has a smell to it, and Humanity's Secretary General, a sharp-minded woman named Adiz Okonkwo, recognized it immediately. She read the message once, standing at her office window, overlooking Lagos, the morning sun painting everything in gold. Then she set it down, folded her hands, and was quiet for a very long time. Her chief of staff hovered nearby. "How do you want to respond?" Adiz didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about her grandfather, a man who had spent 40 years as a construction engineer, building bridges and transit systems across 3 continents. A man who had shown up every day before sunrise, worked past sunset, never complained, never asked for applause. A man who, when he finally retired, received a card signed by 12 co-workers, most of whom had misspelled his name. She was thinking about what he told her once, sitting on a porch in Enugu, watching the last light leave the sky. "Adiz," he said, "some people will only ever see what you're worth the moment you're gone." She picked up the message again. The Galactic Council formally requests the resumption of human diplomatic and operational presence across Council space, effective at earliest convenience, in order to address several time-sensitive matters of mutual concern. Mutual concern. 200 years of one-sided giving, and the Council still couldn't bring itself to say the word please. "Draft a response," Adiz said finally. "Acknowledge receipt. Tell them we're reviewing the request internally and will respond in due course." Her chief of staff blinked. That's it. They flagged it as urgent. "I know. The Orvaniketh situation is escalating. There are reports of—" "I know." Her voice was calm, immovable, like a wall you don't see until you've already walked into it. "Draft the response exactly as I described." The message Earth sent back was 8 sentences long. In council chambers, Valoran read it aloud to a room full of delegates who had expected an immediate yes, a relieved flood of human personnel flowing back through the gates, order restored, crisis averted. Instead, they got 8 sentences and due course. The silence that followed was extraordinary. And then, because the galaxy apparently had a sense of timing, a second crisis arrived. The Sindori Agricultural Relay Network, which coordinated food distribution across 19 colony worlds, crashed. Not partially, completely. Every distribution algorithm, every logistical subroutine, every inventory management system down simultaneously. 40 million people across 19 worlds would begin running short on food within 90 days. The technical team sent to diagnose the failure spent 4 hours searching the system architecture before one of them made a discovery so stunning she actually laughed out loud, a short, sharp sound that was entirely without humor. She called her supervisor over. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the screen. "The network's core adaptive algorithm. The piece of code that made the entire system functional, that had been running flawlessly for 60 years, had been written by a human programmer. Not commissioned, not contracted, volunteered. A human systems engineer named Tomas Reyes had offered to help optimize the network during a routine council initiative 63 years ago. His work was so elegant, so far ahead of anything the council's own teams had produced, that they had quietly built the entire modern relay network on top of it. Tomas Reyes had died 20 years ago at the age of 91. His documentation, the notes, the annotations, the explanation of how and why the system worked, existed in one place. The Human Embassy Archive on Nexus Primus, which had been packed into boxes and shipped to Earth 4 days ago. The technical team supervisor stared at the screen for a very long moment. Then she filed an emergency escalation to the council with a subject line that contained, for the first time in 200 years of formal diplomatic communication, an exclamation point. In her office on Earth, Adiz Okonkwo received a copy of that escalation automatically through a monitoring system her team had quietly set up years ago, because humans, it turned out, had always been paying attention even when no one was paying attention to them. She read the subject line, looked out at the city below, and allowed herself, just briefly, a small and private smile. "Now, they're beginning to understand," she said softly, but understanding, she knew, was only the first step. The question was what humanity would do with the leverage they had never asked for, but had somehow, quietly, inevitably built. And that decision, the one being debated right now in quiet rooms in Geneva and Nairobi and Mumbai and Sao Paulo, that decision was going to change everything. The debate on Earth lasted 11 days. 11 days of closed-door sessions, heated arguments, long silences, and longer nights. Representatives from every nation, every bloc, every faction of humanity's global government sat across from each other and asked the question that 200 years of rejection had never allowed them to ask seriously before. What do we actually want? Not what would the council allow. Not what was politically safe. Not what fit inside the narrow box of Class 7 provisional species pending review. What did humanity want? It was a harder question than it sounds. 2 centuries of being told you're not quite good enough has a way of making ambition feel dangerous, like reaching for something you're not supposed to touch. A whole civilization had grown up in the galaxy's waiting room, and some part of every human diplomat, every human engineer, every human doctor who had ever worked in council space had quietly internalized the message. Stay small. Stay useful. Maybe someday they'll let you in. That someday had never come. And now the galaxy was on fire, slowly, in the way that only becomes undeniable when it's almost too late, and humanity held a bucket of water. The question was the price. On day 4 of the debate, a veteran diplomat named Haruki Sato stood up in the assembly hall and said something that cut through every carefully constructed argument like a blade. "We keep talking about what to ask for," he said quietly. "Rank elevation, voting rights, formal recognition. These are all correct. These are all deserved." He paused. "But I want to ask a different question. Not what do we ask for, but who do we ask?" The room waited. The council that ignored us for 200 years is the same council that is calling us now. The same system, the same structure, the same hierarchy that looked at everything we built and still called us provisional. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. If we walk back in and accept a slightly better version of what we already had, if we let them reclassify us from Class 7 to Class 5 and call it progress, we will have taught them nothing, and in another 200 years, some other species will be standing exactly where we stood. Silence. "We don't just negotiate for humanity," Haruki said. "We negotiate for every species that has ever been told to wait their turn by people who never intended to let them have one." The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. Nothing important ever is. But it was decisive. Humanity would respond to the council. But not with diplomats. With conditions. The message arrived in council chambers on a Wednesday. It was not 8 sentences this time. It was 47 pages. Velorin read the entire document before the emergency session convened. He read it slowly, carefully, the way you read something when you suspect every word was chosen with surgical precision. And you're right. By page 12, he had stopped being surprised. By page 29, he had started feeling something he recognized, after considerable reflection, as respect. By page 47, he sat back and understood, fully and finally, the magnitude of what humanity had been quietly building toward for 200 years. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a power grab. It was a redesign. Humanity wasn't asking to join the council as it existed. They were proposing to rebuild it. New representation tiers, not based on age or biological complexity or the arbitrary classifications of species that had been powerful long enough to write the rules in their own favor. Based on contribution. Measurable, documented, cross-reference contribution. Mandatory review cycles for all provisional species, with binding timelines that couldn't be quietly shelved. An independent medical and humanitarian core, modeled on 200 years of human outreach work, that operated outside political leverage and couldn't be withheld during diplomatic disputes. And at the very center of it all, one condition that made 3 of the senior delegates audibly react when Valoran read it aloud: full voting membership, immediate, non-negotiable, or humanity does not return. Not provisional, not pending, not subject to review in another decade or another century. Now, Ambassador Dross of the Mervani Collective was on his feet before Valoran finished the sentence. This is extortion. They are holding critical services hostage to force a political outcome. They are doing nothing of the kind, Valoran said, with a quiet firmness that stopped Dross mid-sentence. They have not threatened us. They have not sabotaged a single system. They have simply left. He set the document down. Everything that is failing, we built on their work without acknowledging it. Everything that is at risk, we put at risk by refusing to see them clearly. He looked around the chamber. They are not holding us hostage, Ambassador. We locked ourselves in this room. They just stopped pretending the door wasn't closed. The chamber was silent. Outside, on 19 colony worlds, food reserves ticked downward by another day. On Theros Station, Sorath, the Velhari physician, sat beside a child who was still breathing, barely, and refreshed an empty inbox for the 43rd time. And in Geneva, Adiz Okonkwo waited, calm, still, certain in the way that only comes from knowing, at last, exactly who you are. The council deliberated for 5 days. 5 days of arguments, procedural motions, ancient precedents pulled from archives that hadn't been opened in centuries. 5 days of species who had held power for 1,000 years trying to find a way to say yes without feeling like they'd lost something. Because that was the thing no one in that chamber wanted to admit out loud. Accepting humanity's terms didn't just mean giving humans a seat at the table. It meant acknowledging that the table had been wrong all along. And that is a much harder thing to swallow. On day 2, the Keithian delegation proposed a compromise. Full voting membership, but phased. A 10-year provisional elevation period before full rights were granted. A gesture toward change that was carefully designed to change as little as possible. Earth's response arrived within 6 hours. No. One word. No explanation. No counteroffer. No softening language or diplomatic cushioning. Just no. On day 3, the Mervani bloc proposed a different structure. Immediate membership, but with a weighted voting system that would limit human influence on matters of established galactic order for the first 50 years. Earth's response arrived in 4 hours this time. No. Ambassador Dross slammed his hand on the council desk, hard enough to crack the surface. They are being deliberately obstinate. This is not negotiation. It is exactly what we did to them, said a quiet voice from the far end of the chamber. Everyone turned. The speaker was Ambassador Lyra of the Somnathi, a species so ancient and so rarely vocal in council proceedings that half the room had momentarily forgotten she was there. The Somnathi had been members of the Galactic Council since before most current species had developed interstellar travel. When Lyra spoke, the weight of that history came with every word. For 200 years, she said, her voice unhurried, humanity submitted requests for rank elevation. 17 times, I counted, 17 formal petitions, each one accompanied by documented contributions that would have qualified any other species for immediate advancement. She paused. Do you know how we responded? Silence. Committees, she said. Review periods. Provisional extensions. Compromises that preserved our comfort while offering them almost nothing. She looked slowly around the room. We did not negotiate with humanity for 200 years, Ambassador Dross. We managed them. There is a difference. and now you are surprised that they recognize the same tactic when they see it. Nobody spoke. Lyra folded her hands. I am going to tell you what I believe will happen if we continue on this path. The Orvani-Keth conflict will escalate into open war within 30 days. The Sindori Food Network will fail completely within 60. 17 other critical systems, I have had my staff reviewing the dependency reports, will experience cascading failures within 90. She let that sit for a moment, and humanity will watch from Earth, sad but unsurprised, because this is exactly the outcome they spent 200 years trying to help us prevent. Velorin had been listening in silence. Now he spoke. What is your recommendation, Ambassador Lyra? Accept their terms. Fully. Immediately. She tilted her head slightly, and then spent a great deal of time thinking about what it means that one provisional species, given the lowest possible rank and never once formally empowered, became the connective tissue holding this entire institution together. Her eyes moved slowly around the chamber. Because if we accept their terms and learn nothing, we will find ourselves here again, just with different names and different faces, and the same closed door. The room was very still. Outside the chamber, a message was already moving through the station's communication network. Not from Earth, not from the Council, from Theros Station, from Soreth, the Velhari physician who had finally, through 6 days of desperate searching, found a partial copy of the Human Medical Treatment Protocol in an obscure academic archive, an old paper published by a human researcher 20 years ago, enough to piece together a rough treatment approximation. The child on her ward was still alive, but just barely, and the message Soreth sent wasn't to the Council, and it wasn't to Earth's government. It was addressed directly to Ambassador Kale Vasquez, whose personal contact information she had found in the same archive, a footnote of all things in a paper about cross-species pharmaceutical adaptation. The message was short. I don't know if you'll see this. I don't know if you have any reason to answer, but there is a child here who is dying, and you are the only people in the galaxy who know how to save her. I am not asking on behalf of the Council. I am asking for myself. Please. She sent it and sat back in her chair in the dim light of the ward, surrounded by the soft sounds of monitors, and waited. She did not expect an answer. She was wrong. Kale Vasquez was standing in his kitchen in Porto Alegre, making coffee when the message arrived. He read it once, looked out the window at the quiet street below, the morning birds, the ordinary sky, the world that had kept spinning, warm and indifferent while galaxies held their breath. He read it again. Then he did something that surprised even him. He didn't call the Secretary General, didn't route it through diplomatic channels, didn't check whether responding violated the terms of the withdrawal or complicated Earth's negotiating position or created some legal ambiguity that would take a committee 6 months to untangle. He just replied, "Tell me the child's weight, species-specific cardiac baseline, and current oxygen absorption rate. I'll walk you through it." Within 4 minutes, he had Soreth on a live channel. Within 11 minutes, he had called Dr. Yemi Adeyemi, a human xenopharmacologist currently watching television in Lagos, who joined the channel without a single complaint and pulled up her research files from memory with the focus calm of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for exactly this kind of middle-of-the-night emergency. 3 hours later, the child's vitals stabilized. Soreth sat back in her chair, pressed both hands over her face, and cried without making a sound. When she finally looked up, Kale was still on the channel. Still there, as if leaving had never crossed his mind. "Thank you," she managed. "She's going to be fine," he said simply. "Get some rest." He closed the channel and finished his coffee, which had gone cold. The Council voted on day 5. Not because the political calculus had suddenly become comfortable. Not because the old guard had experienced a change of heart overnight, but because Ambassador Lyra of the Somnathy stood up on the morning of day 5 and said something the chamber had never heard her say in 300 years of attendance. I am calling for an immediate vote, and I am telling each of you plainly that history is watching this moment. Not the history we write for ourselves, the real kind, the kind that remembers what people actually did when it mattered. The vote was not unanimous, but it was enough. Humanity was granted full voting membership in the Galactic Council, effective immediately, with no provisional period, no weighted limitations, and no sunset clauses buried in the fine print. The new representation framework humanity had proposed, contribution-based, tiering mandatory review cycles, the Independent Humanitarian Corps, was formally accepted as the basis for a comprehensive council restructuring to begin within the year. 200 years of Provisional ended in a single vote on a Tuesday afternoon. Valoran transmitted the result to Earth personally. A direct channel, voice only, no intermediaries. When Adiz Okonkwo answered, he did not open with formal language. He did not recite protocols. He said, "It passed. All terms accepted. We should have done this a long time ago." A pause. "Yes," she said. "You should have." Another pause, longer this time. "Will you come back?" And here was the moment, the one that mattered most. Not the vote, not the legal text, not the restructuring framework. This moment, one human, one ancient alien diplomat, the whole weight of 2 centuries sitting in the silence between 2 words. "We never stopped working," Adiz said, finally. "We just stopped pretending the door was open when it was closed. You've opened it. We'll walk through it." The first human transports returned to Council space 8 days later. There was no parade, no grand ceremony, no sweeping orchestral moment designed for a highlight reel. Humans simply showed up the way they always had, quietly, practically, ready to work. On Theros Station, Soreth was waiting at the docking bay when the medical team arrived. She had never met a human in person before, only worked with them through screens and channels and the borrowed scaffolding of other people's introductions. She had expected something more impressive. She thought, something that looked like what they had done. Instead, a group of 12 ordinary-looking people walked off the transport with equipment cases and tired eyes and coffee cups, and the one in the lead, a young woman with close-cropped hair, looked up, spotted Soreth, and smiled. "Dr. Soreth? I'm Dr. Adeyemi. I hear you've had a rough week." Soreth stared at her for a moment. "You were on the channel," she said slowly, 3 days ago, with Ambassador Vasquez. You helped save the child." Yemi nodded, already moving, already pulling up a tablet, already shifting into the efficient forward momentum that Soreth would come to recognize as distinctly, irreducibly human. "How is she?" "Recovering. Stronger every day." "Good." A pause. "Now, show me everything that's broken. Let's get to work." Somewhere in the Galactic Archive, a new entry was being written. Not by the Council, not by any official historian, by a small automated system that one human archivist had quietly built into the record-keeping infrastructure 12 years ago, a system designed to flag and preserve moments of historical significance that might otherwise be overlooked. The entry was brief. Year 2247. Duration of human silence. 22 days, 7 hours, 43 minutes. Systems affected. 2,247. Conflicts escalated. 3. Lives at risk, approximately 40 million. Council restructuring initiated. Yes. Species reclassification. Complete. Notes. Humanity did not raise their voice. They did not have to. The silence was enough.